Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Farming Focus, the podcast for Southwest farmers, proudly brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I'm your host, Peter Green, and today we're talking about balance and what that really means in a farming context. From decision-making to work-life balance and personal purpose, we'll be exploring how farmers can find a better rhythm, not just in their businesses, but in their wider lives. We'll also look at how understanding your personal mission or North Star can shape the way you run your farm. Nikki Yoxall is Technical Director at Pasture for Life, where she leads on research and knowledge exchange. And also, she's a grazier herself based in northeast Scotland. As if that wasn't enough, Nikki is currently undertaking a PhD focused on agroecological transitions. Also with us is Andrew Brewer, a dairy farmer from Cornwall, managing 500 Jersey crosses across 400 hectares. Andrew was named the 2024 Carbon Farmer of the Year by the Farm Carbon Toolkit and has a wide range of experience in both farming and diversification, including running a fish and chip shop alongside the family farm. He's also a Nuffield Scholar, completing his report in 2015, which explored training, recruiting and retaining high-quality workers in the dairy sector. Nikki, Andrew, a warm welcome to you both. I am thrilled to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you very much.
Nikki, can you introduce yourself briefly, please?
Yeah, well, the first thing to say is I'm not feeling particularly balanced today. So being totally open and honest from the start. But
That's absolutely fine. We'll see how you feel at the end.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And yeah, as you've already said, you know, I'm farming up here in the Angus Glens. We moved in March to a new farm partnership. Myself, my husband, and then with our new business partner, Rottle Estates. And I also do work for Pasture for Life and finishing off my PhD. So yeah, quite a lot going on, but very excited to be able to talk to you today.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. And Andrew, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yep, so I'm Andrew Brewer. I farm in mid-Cornwall with my wife and two daughters and a fantastic team of staff.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. Thanks both. So, Nikki, you sort of alluded to balance there right at the top. But when we talk about balance, what does that mean to you personally and professionally?
Yeah, I think it's different for everyone, right? But the main thing is that you have understanding of what you want your week to be, what you want your days to feel like. And so for me, balance is about making sure that you're spending time doing the things that you want to do. And we all have things that we don't like doing and things that we don't enjoy. For some people, that might be the VAT return. For some people, it might be milking cows. For some people, it might be having to gather sheep, whatever it is. For some people, it is doing the paperwork, filling in the forms. Depending on who you are and what your strengths are, we're all going to have to do things we don't like doing. But I think what's important is that we're very clear about what are the things we do like doing and how do we make sure that we're structuring our time in a way that allows us to do those things. And so for many people, that's going to be having time to go, for example, and watch their kids play sport, or being able to spend time with family members, or just having a bit of alone time, reading a book with a nice cup of hot chocolate or something. So I think, yeah, being very clear about what does balance feel like, and then we know how we're getting on.
And when I've heard you speaking before, particularly on this subject, you've talked about a statement of purpose. Could you just sort of unpack that a little bit and maybe what that means and where that might come from?
Sure. So a statement of purpose is something that comes out of holistic management. So my husband and I are both holistic management trained, and this is the work of Alan Savory. I always caveat this by saying that I do have some issues and challenges around, issues linked to kind of colonialism and imperialism and around Alan and the work that he's done in Africa. I just like to caveat that, but saying that the work that he has done and the development of holistic management as a decision-making framework has been genuinely life-changing for us. And one of the first things that you do when you create your holistic context is develop this statement of purpose. So what's the point of you being on this planet? What's the point of you doing what you're doing? So for us, within our business, it's creating abundance and diversity to nourish people. So that's what we want to achieve: abundance and diversity to nourish people. And so having that absolute clarity allows us to make sure that all of the other things come alongside that. And another, we can talk about it later, but within holistic management, you develop something called a future resource base, which is how do you want your life to look in the future to help you make decisions to get you there. And so balance is very much a part of that.
So, Andrew, we've heard a bit about what balance looks and feels like for Nikki. How about you? How has your understanding of balance changed over your years in farming?
Look, most children, and when you're in your younger years, you love the seesaw and you love the ups and downs, don't you? But you learn to balance, and you hope the person on the other end of the seesaw helps you balance and doesn't hit the floor too hard and doesn't lift you flying in when you hit the highs either. But it's keeping you steady. And I think people have to be aware that it changes as you grow older. In your 20s and 30s, you think you can do it all and you can spin all the plates. But now I'm in my 50s, you realise that it's a hell of a lot easier to spin all those plates with better people helping you. And also, as your family, you before children, your goals are very different. But when your children grow older, our girls are now in their mid-20s, and we have a grandson, around now one, and that's life changing. But also, as a family business, you have to be ready to enable their goals as well. That's partly why we've diversified into the fish and chip shop. But so it's about striking balance for everybody. You have to remember it's not just you.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much to go out there. So I'm going to ask the obvious question first, and that'll give me some time to try and sort of unpick some of the rest of your answer. That was brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. So I guess we've heard a little bit about the way Nikki would approach some of her decision making. How do you approach your own decision making? And I guess particularly under pressure, farm life can be very busy, and there's always something going on. How do you approach decision making to try and achieve that balance?
Nikki's mentioned her statement of purpose. We've got a vision statement. So it'd be much the same, and it's having that vision to go for and a strategic plan. We would always have a 5-year strategic plan done running ahead. Problem with a strategic plan and a 5-year plan is you usually achieve it by 3. So then you have to keep updating that. It's it's a living document. It's not set in stone. Life is about changes. I love a bit of change myself, but I get bored else. But you have to strike everybody's goals and understand everybody's differences as well.
That's really interesting to hear you talking about loving change. That's so as part of my Nuffield farming scholarship, I'm talking to people about how open to change they are and what the mood of their business is and how it's inclined towards change. And a lot of people, change can be a really scary thing, but it's interesting to hear you talking about loving change. I'm interested in your vision and about the strategy. So would I be right in thinking, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, that the vision is maybe a more qualitative document with sort of an outline of what things will look like when you've achieved it, whereas the strategy might have more sort of pounds, shillings and pence and be more about numbers and quantities?
Back in 2007, I did a wealth creation course based over in Ireland. Claire, my wife, did it in 2008. That always talked about the 3 W's of, where are you now? Where do you want to be? And what do you have to do to get to where you want to be? That really set us going. And we were pushing, and I was probably going to be a raving capitalist at that point, but that actually made us realize what was really important in life and to get that clarity. And it just keeps us, gives us a clear vision. The long-term vision is where we want to be, but we use the strategic plan to get to where we want to be.
Yeah, and you've sort of stuck to those 3 W's, as it were. That's a framework you use now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any investments we're doing, any longer-term investments, we have a plan. We have a return on capital that we look to get. And that's what then we will use those 3 W's to make sure it fits with that plan. The only thing that probably we vary on would be the purchase of land, but we've got strong goals that we follow with that. We don't stray from that at all.
I love this. I love the purpose. I'm so excited to hear these answers. Nikki, I'm going to come to you. You were nodding along to a lot of what Andrew was saying there. I think something I'm quite interested in maybe is the fact that Andrew's alluded to the fact that there's a number of different stakeholders in the business, and maybe we'll come back to that. Yeah, Nikki, I'd love your thoughts on the extent to which we can accommodate other people's goals, or the extent to which maybe we need to look at just our own as a starting point, and any other thoughts you might have had on what Andrew was saying there.
Yeah, I think it's a really key point. And again, coming back to holistic management, we always want to try and get everybody around the table when we're having conversations. I think that one of the massive challenges I see in my work with farmers is that you don't always get the right people around the table having the conversations. I was recently on a farm giving some advice and giving them some help in terms of changing their system. But the key person who needed to be there, who was the son, who was like the operational, he made everything happen every single day, but he wasn't involved in the conversation. And I was very conscious of that. And it really stressed me out that, that we only had the people that sign the checks, not any of us sign checks anymore, but, it was the kind of people that do the actual, the head of the business, for example, but not the people with hands in the mud, boots on the ground, as it were. So I think it's really, really key when you're making business decisions, whether they're big or small. And sometimes it's good to start with small ones to get used to bringing more people into the conversation. What order you're doing something in, what day you're going to choose to do a particular job. If you've got to, for example, I don't know, if you're planning your shearing or something, then that not just being one person's decision, but even if it's a tokenistic approach to just say, what do we all think? You kind of have to learn how to have those conversations. They don't always come naturally. So I think the point about getting everybody involved in decision making, it's easier than it sounds, but it takes practice. And so you do have to kind of craft those conversations, craft those sentences to bring people along and to make sure that people feel like they have a say in decisions. And also accept that if you are the kind of de facto leader who is inviting that wider discussion, that you might get an answer you don't like, and that you kind of have to be okay to go with that. So if I've gone to a team and said, right, we need to shear, we're shearing the sheep this week, and anyone who knows me who's listening will be laughing their heads off because I don't really like sheep. So I don't know quite why I'm using that as an example, but I'm going to go with it. So if I said, we're going to shear the sheep this week, what day do you all think? And I've already decided it's going to be Wednesday, but everybody else decides Thursday. You have to kind of have the humility to go, okay, we're going to go for Thursday. Because if you invite people to get involved in making decisions and then you undermine them, they're not going to want to make decisions long term. So, that balance is, as Andrew's excellently alluded to earlier about the seesaw, in terms of how we personally feel, that same sort of seesaw analogy can be used in terms of give and take in the business around decision making as well.
I love that. And I love the idea there. And this absolutely applies to me. I'm hopeless at this, about opening it up to the team, but making sure that we're ready to hear a different opinion, because I'm absolutely guilty of not doing that, of having a fixed opinion and finding it difficult to take on board other people's thoughts. I guess one sort of detailed point around that is, presumably, Nikki, we just need to be careful that we don't move towards groupthink and that we're asking the right question in the right context. And some things we maybe don't need to consult on. We just need to move forward with the decision. Is that fair?
Yeah, and again, I think it comes back to how you don't have to ask everyone to make every decision. You can ask people individually, oh, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And that doesn't mean that you're then putting them on the spot in front of an audience, expecting them to make a decision, but you're gathering information. So you're kind of intelligence gathering so that you then can make a better and more informed decision. And it might be that as someone who has more awareness of other challenges or wider aspects that others haven't considered, that you might not accept their suggestions and go with what you were going to go with anyway. But it's the process that I think is so key. It's just so important that we all just get a bit better at having conversations to gather information, see what each other are thinking before we go ahead and make changes. And like Andrew, I actually really love change. Like, I really thrive off it. I get very excited about doing something different or doing something new or having a new opportunity. But my husband doesn't quite feel the same way about change. It takes him a little bit longer. And so it's being mindful of that and just being aware that whether it's your partner or it's someone that you're working with in business, that we all have a different speed and rate at which we can accommodate those changes. And that needs to be brought to mind all the time, I think.
Oh, the rate of change. Oh, gosh. Yeah, that's another point. I'm going to have to meditate on that one a bit more away from this discussion. Okay, thank you. So we've talked there about decision making and the process around that, with a view to achieving balance. But Andrew, coming to you, we've already alluded to the fact that farming's so busy it can be all consuming. What practical strategies have you found helpful for creating space to get some time away from the business?
So for us, when we were all spring calving, we actually went to once a day. And, I used to use milking time for clarity of thinking when I was doing all the milking, but we got to the stage I didn't have that time. But by using that afternoon milking that we weren't doing to make proper strategic decisions, helped our business immensely.
Wow. So that was a daily thing.
Yeah. But it's also this is me personally, it's learning to trust people that they can do it. My motto is there is always a better way. We've got a great team now and they come with slightly different ideas, but I've learned now that I go with it and just let them get on with it. As long as they know what the plan is, you have to get over yourself if you can do it better than anybody else and just focus on the results. If they're delivering the results, we go with it.
And I guess that you preempted my question, because I was going to ask, how do you give yourself the permission to let other people make some decisions and make those mistakes? Because I can be a control freak and I can find it really hard to let go. But you're saying just sort of trust yourself and trust your people with those decisions.
Yes. And keeping yourself busy enough doing something else.
I like that one. So, Nikki, Andrew's talked a bit about how he makes space, but where have you seen really good practical examples of people in farming businesses that have been able to get distance from their operation when necessary?
Well, as someone who got rejected from Nuffield first time round, I'm feeling slightly bitter about this, but obviously anyone who goes and does a Nuffield scholarship gets that opportunity to create space, which is definitely something I included in my second application to try and get Nuffield. Hopefully they'll be sick of me applying and they'll accept me. But I think getting off farm and doing something that's quite structured, like a Nuffield or a Churchill scholarship, because other scholarships are available, that there are opportunities to go and do something and get space without feeling like I have to get off farm because someone's told me it's a good idea to get off farm. So those are the really big things, right? Kind of spending however many weeks it is, 8 weeks or whatever abroad, experiencing a whole different side of life. But I think also there's something about, farmers getting off farm but going to agricultural shows. There's something kind of a bit, it's good because it gives you some space from the farm, but you're definitely at risk of still being in farm mode and farm mindset. And again, saying that as someone who loves going to groundswell, it's a real highlight of my summer. But I think just finding and making space for time away from things. And like for me, James and I actually, when I started working from home and he changed his job and he's now farming full time, we really try, if we can, and go out for lunch every now and again, because it's a bit of like a odd time of day. Normally, lunch, it's just a quick sandwich when you're passing, quickly throw something together, eat, talk about the rest of the day, and then you crack on. But we really do try and get in at least once a month, just let's go and have somewhere. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just let's go out for lunch, so that we're forcing ourselves to take a few hours away in the middle of the day where it's not at evening, so we're not exhausted. It's kind of, we've got brain capacity to have some interesting conversations, whether that's strategic thinking or whether it is just about other stuff entirely. And I think sometimes people beat themselves up. They think that they're taking time off and they should be working. And we have this very weird kind of culture of hard work equaling good farming. But actually just forcing yourselves just to go and, either have breakfast somewhere or lunch or just getting off farm, but during the day for a couple of hours, I think is a really good way to try and create that space.
That's a real punctuation, isn't it? Doing something like that. I can absolutely see the benefit of getting away and getting that perspective. And I've quoted Matthew Naylor's advice about getting off your farm many, many times in this podcast, and the necessity of doing so where possible. Really interesting to hear you talking about that kind of badge of honour piece, Nikki. I've heard you speak before about the importance of what we do versus the importance of what we don't, and the extent to which we sort of worry as a tribe about what others think. To what extent, Nikki, do you think that ag suffers from excessive peer pressure, perhaps more than other industries?
Oh my goodness, it's right there, isn't it? The whole kind of looking over the hedge, looking over the fence thing, worrying about neighbours. I have more conversations with farmers who are going through kind of like farm transition, where they're worried, the main barrier for them is what other people think. And those other people might be extended family or it might be neighbours, but it's not really what they think. Most of them are kind of, we're keen for this change. We want to do something differently. But what about the thistles? What about the nettles? What about the docks or whatever? And what about keeping my animals outside over winter? What are other people going to think? And again, I think it's, I used to be kind of quite evangelical and be like, it doesn't matter, you've got to just do the right thing. But actually, it does matter. And if someone is really upset and worried and they can't sleep because they're worried about, I don't know what Uncle Tony up the road thinks of them, then actually just top the thistles if that's going to help you sleep at night. So I think there is something about the balance of learning how to cope with peer pressure and not kind of capitulating to it too quickly, but recognizing, again, coming back to that point of balance, recognizing when it's affecting you. If it's stopping you from sleeping, worrying about what your uncle thinks or your man down the road, then take some action. But, only do that if you really need to. I think we're very quick to get into a way of thinking or a way of doing things that fits with other people. And I'm sure many, we're not the only industry for it. Everything's very tribal, isn't it, anyway, regardless of what industry you're in. So I think that's an inevitability. I would love for some of those barriers between different tribes or groups within agriculture to be broken down. I think we're still too sector focused, and some of the most interesting conversations I've had are with arable and dairy farmers, and I don't do either of those things, sadly. I'd love to be milking cows, but yeah, I really think there's so much, for example, that beef and sheep can learn from dairy, and it frustrates me that we're still so sector tribally split.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like there's very much a piece for consciousness of thought there. Andrew, your reflections on what Nikki said there.
We've been part of a discussion group for 25 years, and we regularly do our comparable farm profit figures, but there's a lot of other KPIs in that are really important. And one of probably the most important one would be CFD, cow-free days. So how many, that's that we compare against other farmers, and also the hours per cow, and there would be a massive difference between the group. So, you don't have to work 90 hours per cow. Some are getting down as low as 9, and there's a massive difference there.
Just extend that a little bit. You say there's a massive difference. There's a massive difference between the farm spending a lot of time per cow and less time per cow. How does that difference look? How does that manifest itself?
So others work to live and others live to work. And there's a very big difference. And that could be the same, that could be two brothers.
That's really fascinating. Really fascinating. I saw everyone on the screen, apart from Andrew, there typing down cow-free days as a metric to keep. So I think we're all going to be using that one liberally in conversations going forward. Nikki, just briefly coming back to you on what Andrew said there. Any reflections on that and the perhaps the usefulness, the importance of discussion groups, of peer groups, benchmarking, anything like that?
Yeah, totally. I'm such a massive fan of dairy discussion groups that we have now set up our own beef and sheep Pasture for Life discussion group in Scotland, using basically the same model, because it doesn't really exist so much. And I know that the AHDB's Roots to Resilience programme has also set up a kind of discussion group for people that have gone through that, and that mirrors the Executive Link programme that Ranching for Profit do in the US. So I think that it's so valuable, and it requires trust, and it requires a trusted group to come together to share some of that quite detailed financial information. But accountability is really key, and Andrew will know this inside out from doing 25 years of discussion groups. There is so much, I think, that others in the sector can learn from that, and having that opportunity to come together and talk about what people are doing on their farm, why one farm is more profitable per hectare than another, what they're doing differently, what they've learned from that experience, and I think also determining your KPIs that are relevant for you, which is touching on what Andrew said. If your limiting factor, so for us, our limiting factor has always been historically land, so output per hectare has been key, because we didn't own any and we had to rely on working with other people to get access to land, whereas time was less of an issue for us. But for some people, labour really is a limiting factor. So it's identifying what's your limiting factor so that you can develop business relevant KPIs that allow you to understand the efficiencies of your business in a very context specific way. And that might be different for different people. For some people, it's about cash or it's about per cow or whatever it is. But I think being clear on those KPIs so that you've got something to measure progress against is key.
So I love that. And I'm very much on board that bus. But there'll be people listening who are wondering, how do I work out what my constraining factor is? Is it just a case of, at lunchtime, back of an envelope, just working out how the business might look with another 10 cows or another 10 acres or 10 fewer acres or whatever it might be. Is it as simple as that, Nikki?
I think it's a good starting point. And within holistic management, we always talk about trusting your gut. And so, quite often people will know, like, oh, the thing I'm short of is time, or the thing I'm short of is land, or the thing I'm short of is whatever. And some farmers will tell you it's time, it's land, it's money, it's, a little bit from every single one of those columns. But I think initially just sort of thinking to yourself, like, what does it feel like I'm struggling with in terms of what am I short of? What's the thing that's been difficult for me to get hold of? So there will be farms that are struggling to recruit people. So for them, that's a very obvious one. Labour is a challenge. There are others for whom it could be amount of time it takes to move animals or something. I don't know. It could be, there's all sorts of things that will be indicators of what it is that is your limiting factor as a business. I think we have to be careful though and sense check it, because often people will just say, well, if I had more land, of course I'd be more successful. It's very easy just to assume that access to land or amount of land available to farm is your limiting factor. I think, there's plenty of great examples where people have reduced they thought that they needed more land, but actually what they did do was just reduce cow numbers and then ended up being more profitable as a result. So there is something about not getting caught up in your own assumptions and sense checking it, but using that gut instinct first, and just get a good consultant who will be able to help you. Chuck in a couple of grand at a really good consultant to help you understand that benchmark where you're starting from will be massively returned long term. You will get that money back and more if you get that initial clarity over where you are starting from and where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about the difference between optimal and maximizing things before. We've interviewed Chris Clark a couple of times, who's spoken about this very thing. Andrew, coming back to you and thinking about moving businesses forward, are you still looking to expand business overall? And how has the need for balance between life inside and outside of the business affected that decision?
So we're always looking for opportunities. I wouldn't be living and breathing if I wasn't looking for opportunities, but they've got to fit with our plan. And we've tried over the last 10 years or so, we don't want to be buying work. We want to be buying passive income, and also to grow people. Growing people is really important for us. Like Claire and my wife and I, I used to say I hated people, but actually I love to grow people and see them develop. And what we found with the chip shop, that can be run. It's very much, we have a lot of people with their first jobs, and to see those people develop and set them going on life's journey, it is so rewarding. It's a profitable business as well, but it's about having that core profitable cash-rich business. If you can go down that cash-rich route, it allows so many more opportunities, but you have to sit down and make sure your core business is right first. Too many times you see people growing, but it's far better. You need to be better before you get bigger.
Yeah, so better before you get bigger, and making sure that the core business is sorted and operating well before we look to diversify. Yeah, I think we can probably all think of people, businesses that have done exactly that, Andrew, as you've said. They've maybe looked to run before they can walk, and have looked to grow too quickly or in a way which maybe hasn't suited them. Brilliant. Those are great insights. Thank you. So, Nikki, you work a lot on big picture thinking around agroecology systems, farming transitions. How important is it for farmers to have the strong sense of purpose allied to making sure that their core business is straight, as we've just talked about?
Yeah, I think it's critical. If you want to make big strategic changes in your business, you don't just sort of do that without knowing where you're going. It's one thing to know that you need to make a change. A lot of those sort of academic literature around transition and farm transition and transformation often talks about trigger points, and we'll all know of farmers who had whatever happened to them, something terrible, something tragic, and it could be around succession, it could be around losing land, it could be opportunities. We'll all know of those stories, and those are the things that kind of prompted change. But if you don't know where you want to go to with that change, you're kind of just going to be flailing around a little bit lost, and you might make bad decisions. So it's the same thing for farmers who are thinking about, we want to go down a more regenerative or agroecological route. Being able to have clarity of where they are now and kind of get that baseline and do that data collection so you know where you're starting from. and in addition, understand where you want to get to. It's very easy to kind of say, well, I just want to be more profitable. How much more profitable? And what's that profit going to pay for? Like, what's going to happen to that profit? Are you going to reinvest that in the business? Or is that because you want to invest in something else entirely? Or is that so that, you're saying profit, but actually what you really mean is that you want a pay rise? Like, what is it that you're trying to achieve? So I think having that clarity is really, really key.
And it's the question why, isn't it? Why do you want the pay rise? What are you going to do with it?
Absolutely. And asking yourself why multiple times, I think, is a good thing, and understanding what's enough. So I very rarely meet people who can tell me exactly how much cash they and their immediate family need to live the lifestyle that they want to live. How much money do you need in your bank account every month to be able to do the things that you want to do? So, for example, our nearest Waitrose is 2 hours away. And, it's a real treat for me to go and splurge a few £100 at Waitrose once a month. And that sounds incredibly privileged and very ridiculous to most people listening, I'm sure. But I need to know that the income that I have will allow me to do that guilt-free, or, to know that when my car needs a service and an MOT, that I'm not scrabbling around for money to pay for it, that it's okay because there's money there to pay for it. Those are things that are really important to me because they reduce my stress and they give me positive feedback. So I know exactly how much cash James and I need in our bank accounts to live the sort of life that we want to live. And I think once you've worked that out, you can then determine what you need your business to do to serve you. So you want your business to work for you, not you kind of running around trying to make it work, but not really understanding how much money you need.
Which comes back to that point that Andrew made, not wanting to buy work, but wanting to buy passive income. I love the idea of asking the question why and getting to an answer for how much is enough. We spoke to Heather Wildman way back in series 1, and it's worth going back to that episode because Heather talks about how she knows what it is that she needs every year to get to where she wants to get to with retiring, leaving the industry, whatever it is she wants to do next. Fascinating stuff. Andrew, coming back to you, we talked about some of the growing pains with growing a business and some of the bumps and maybe the pitfalls. If a farmer's feeling stuck or overwhelmed, what's one small thing that they might be able to do to maybe reconnect to their purpose, their North Star, and to maybe find balance?
If things are getting on top of me, Claire knows it's getting on top of me. I always keep a notepad and pen by my bed, and if I'm writing lists in the night, I know I've got too much on. But that writing that list down of the jobs you've got to do allows you to prioritize what's really important. And it can be little jobs that you might not get to for 2 years, but you've prioritized the big right decisions early. Everybody has bad days when it's getting on top of you and things won't go to plan. But it's just being able to prioritize that quickly and then investing the time away from the grindstone to understand yourself and your family to set a better direction.
That's brilliant. And it's really interesting that you said away from the grindstone. So actually there is something again here about that perspective, just coming away from, I've used the phrase many times, the muck and the bullets, the detail of the day to day, actually giving ourselves that chance to have some space to look at what's going on. And having that list there, as you say, is so helpful in helping us to prioritize. It's quite hard. I find it quite hard to prioritize things when I've just got a list in my head, which isn't particularly well articulated or defined, but actually getting it down on paper means I can put a number next to it and I can cross things out. It makes me feel so much better. So, Nikki, looking ahead, how do you think a focus on a personal sort of mission or a headline and balance can change the future of farming?
I think at the moment, lots of people feel under pressure and under the cosh within farming. We're as a sector kind of being asked a lot to fix biodiversity loss, to make a significant contribution to climate mitigation. We're being asked, like all other businesses, to increase costs, things, whether that's related to energy or national insurance, whatever it is. So I think we're all feeling a bit under the cosh and feeling quite stressed at the moment. But often we're doing that within a context of also sort of flailing about, not really knowing where we're going. And I think now is a really good time for us to have hard conversations and ask hard questions of ourselves. Do we really want to be doing this? Do we want to continue to farm? do we want to farm in this way? And I think that whilst, we've seen some news that's come out this morning that 6,000, whatever it is, farm businesses have closed in the last year or so, but actually, there are other people potentially able to come in. And just because we're losing people from the sector doesn't mean that there aren't people to come in. Yes, there are challenges for new entrants. I am one, so I'm fully aware of the challenges, but there are opportunities. And I think that, sometimes we can get really mired down in all of the woes and being a bit of a victim. And actually what we need to do is have clarity of purpose to help get our heads up from feeling like we're being trodden on and think, no, this is where I'm going. This is my strategy. And that's what I need to focus on. And really try and keep focusing on that end goal so that you've got a very clear direction. Because when it is easy to get distracted by all the noise, but it gives you something always to come back to. Brilliant.
So Andrew, on a similar theme, how do we make sure that we can find that clarity of purpose that Nikki's spoken about at a time of change when there's so much noise in the industry?
It all comes back to that having that vision and do what you're doing to make sure that it aligns with where you want to be. Don't do the things that are slowing you reaching your destination.
So don't just follow the crowd. Be really clear on what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then be ruthlessly single-minded and focused on only doing things that are going to help you achieve that.
If it's right for you, it's right for you. Don't worry about what's happening on the other side of the hedge, or who's building a bigger shed or milking more cows. It doesn't matter. Okay, just be better than you were yesterday.
Brilliant. Oh, wow. I'm not going to try and better that. Be better than you were yesterday. I love that.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
It's time now for this week's Showstoppers. It's been such a difficult process to try and narrow down all of the amazing things that Andrew and Nikki spoke about into just a handful of points. And it strikes me that really there's a number of things where we spoke about one thing helping to achieve another. And in the first instance, we talked about balance and how it's not something that can be achieved by an individual. In order to achieve balance, we need a team, we need support, we need good communication, we need to involve people in the appropriate decisions, and we need the right people around the table. These are all things that we heard Nikki and Andrew say. And then we spoke about developing businesses to achieve our goals. Andrew talked about not buying in work, but buying in passive income. And I really like this idea. But first of all, he said we've got to make sure that we are better before we get bigger, that we need to make sure the core business is fit before expanding. And this is where we talked about things like key performance indicators or KPIs, which included cow-free days or hours per cow. These are things which can really help us to understand where the bottlenecks are in our business and how and where we might want to expand or even to optimize, perhaps even by getting rid of some of our operation and changing the way we do things. But finally, we talked about how purpose can help us to achieve balance. Nikki said that clarity is key, and Andrew talked about the 3 W's that he'd learned about when setting his purpose. Where are we now? What do we want to achieve? And what do we need to get there? Nikki suggested that we ask ourselves why multiple times to really drill down and to understand what motivates us. And when we're setting these goals, to go to the trouble of working out how much is enough. There's so much from this episode, but these are just a few of the talking points that I'm sure will stick with me, and I hope they stick with you too.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Well, thank you so much to my guests. Andrew, thank you to you. Nikki, thank you to you for just sharing so fully and thoughtfully on all things to do with balance and purpose in farming. It's been such a great conversation. Join us next week for a bonus episode when we'll be looking in more depth at spending time away from the farm. We'd love to hear from you with any feedback that you have about the podcast, any questions or suggestions. So please send us an email at podcast@cornishmutual.co.uk. Check out the show notes for more information on today's episode, including the link to our podcast disclaimer. You've been listening to Farming Focus, brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I've been Peter Green, and until next time, it's goodbye from me and everyone in the Cornish Mutual podcast team.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.